If someone says their ex is crazy on the first date, you should pause. Not because it's always a red flag, but because it's always a clue. It's a clue about how they understand relationships and how they make meaning of pain. And it's a clue of how they may treat you when the relationship gets hard. So let's talk about it. The real psychology behind the crazy ex comment. Because behind that one sentence, there's often a trail of unhealed wounds, or a trail of shame turned outward, or even sometimes a very subtle warning of emotional manipulation or narcissistic defense. So let's break it down. When someone says, my crazy ex, what is that person really telling you? Sometimes they're telling you nothing more than a clumsy attempt at humor, but other times it can be a sign of their lack of emotional accountability, or a projection of their own chaos, or their defense against shame and betrayal. Or it can be a sign of their unresolved trauma, possibly from their childhood. But most dangerously, it can be a tactic used by people with narcissistic traits or tendencies. Because people who rewrite history to preserve their own ego, even if it means destroying someone else's character, often have narcissistic traits or tendencies and can often be a narcissistic person. So let's go deeper. People who suffer with anxious or avoidant attachment styles often have trouble making sense of emotional pain in a relationship. So instead of saying, I felt hurt or abandoned and I didn't know how to cope with that, they say things like, she was so dramatic, or he just snapped for no reason. Because when you're still carrying attachment wounds from early relationships, especially wounds around betrayal or emotional neglect, you often haven't learned how to hold space for complexity. And calling someone crazy becomes a quick fix to a deep emotional problem. And here's what I tell my clients in session. Anytime someone talks about a past partner and takes zero responsibility for anything that went wrong in the relationship, then you need to pause. Because real healing sounds like we both had things that we didn't handle well. Or I learned a lot from how I showed up in that relationship. But projection, on the other hand, projection sounds like they were just crazy. They ruined everything, or they made me do it. Because projection is a psychological defense that shifts blame, but it protects the ego at a cost. And it keeps the person from really growing. And when projection mixes with narcissistic defense, like gaslighting or victim playing, that's when emotional danger becomes very real. So here's what to look for. 1, are they just talking about one difficult situation? Or is every ex crazy? Because if every ex is crazy, that's a pattern of deflection, and that's a huge red flag. Another thing to look for is, do they show emotional insight or reflection? Because if so, that's a good sign, and that is real, and that's not a red flag. Another thing to look for is, do they seem to enjoy telling a story? Because if there's drama or victimhood and there's no sense of accountability in their storytelling, then that is a red flag. Another thing to look for is, do they dehumanize their ex-partner? So if they refer to their ex as less than human, then that's not a person who's ready for a healthy relationship. And that's someone who's using blame as a smoke screen. And that is a red flag that you need to look out for. So I want to be clear. Exploring the attachment wounds behind the behavior and behind these patterns does not make toxic behavior okay. It just helps us name the root of the behavior. And we want to do that so we can protect ourselves. And also we want to learn to do that so we can spot people who are trying to grow and not people who are just performing insight to win you over. And people with unresolved betrayal trauma may use narcissistic defense because they never felt safe enough to admit that they're deeply hurt. But that doesn't make it safe for you to stay in a relationship with them, especially if they're not working on it. So if you're on a date and somebody drops the line, my crazy ex, try saying something like this. Oh wow, that sounds hard. What did you learn about yourself from that relationship? Then sit back and watch how they answer that question. Because how someone speaks about their ex is often how they'll speak one day about you. And if they can't hold space for the messiness of their past, then why would they be able to hold space for the messiness of a real relationship in the present? So the next time someone says, my crazy ex, I want you to remember, it might be a real flag or it might be a red flag. But either way, it's an invitation for you to listen closely. Because how they talk about the past tells you exactly what they haven't healed.